3 minutes after 10, and I think I've got whiplash. I read this paragraph on the front page of today's Times several times. Well, I say several. I got into work with such a small amount of time to spare that I haven't actually conducted my customary trawl through the day's news in search of the tastiest morsels to share with you. But check this out. The government also argues that people's ability to work remotely during the pandemic has made it harder for rail unions to hold the country to ransom. Just pause. Everybody pause for a moment. Just in case you get whiplash as well, because it appears that the government of Jacob Rees-Mogg's glorified post-it note stuck upon the desk of civil servants who he didn't actually realise hot-desked, so the desk didn't actually belong to anybody, and when they all returned to work, it turned out that they had approximately 33% more people than there were actual workstations. The government that was a sworn enemy of working from home just 10 short minutes ago, and indeed the client media, because even the Daily Mail today makes the point that working from home may prove to be something of an obstacle to success for the RMT. Remember? I mean, how long ago was it that you could barely poke your head out of a window without some angry biggins banging on about how awful working from home is, shouting the odds about how terrible it is that people like train drivers don't have the option of working from home. And now here we are. Apparently working from home is great because it's going to stop those train drivers, or railway workers, more precisely, of course, to succeed in their ongoing industrial action. Listen, I know there aren't many places that point this stuff out to you, but I'm going to get exhausted soon. I mean, it's like, you know, when you're watching Wimbledon and the heads of the audience are going fitting, and it's quite funny. This is just ridiculous. How can working from home have suddenly become a good thing overnight? Literally overnight on this occasion. Dear Jacob, when did working from home become a bad thing that was reducing the country to a work-shy rabble and become instead a good thing which is responsible for teaching those pesky railway workers who are, brackets, among the category of people who can't work from home, who you used to pretend you were protecting when you said that working from home... well, answers on a postcard, please, to 0345 606 0973. And apparently we're supposed to blame people who didn't get furloughed now for what is it? People who didn't get any support from the government are the reason why you can't support public sector workers seeking a pay rise. Is that, I don't quite follow that logic. Is that, have I got that right? You can't, excuse me, you can't support teachers requesting a pay rise because some people, I don't even know anymore. I lose track of who I'm supposed to be getting angry with. And in fact, you're lucky I made it here at all, because I left the house this morning intending to come via public transport over rail. And of course, we were warned. We were warned several times to check, because don't worry, there's nothing wrong with the radio. I've got one of those dreadful tickles in the back of my throat that may disappear very quickly or may lead me to conduct this introduction to the programme in an even more disjointed and distracted fashion than usual. So if you hear me having it, I promise you it's water, not gin, okay? On my life. Do you think it would be better if I got less excited? If I just sort of toned it down a little bit and spoke in a slightly more measured fashion instead of hitting notes that frankly are only audible to dogs on some occasions? I don't know. We'll soon find out. So here we are. I left the house about 7:30. Got on a bus to a tube station. Saw through the bus window that the tube station was actually shut. Those dreadful chain gates closed across the tube station. And I thought to myself, it's a good job I left the house early, because this is beginning to look a little tricky. I checked various online travel options, and it suggested that the station would open shortly after 8 o'clock. So I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. I had a look at Uber. Sorry, my friends in the black cab trade, but I was in a part of town where the likelihood of a black cab going past with a light on is pretty much zero. I kept an eye out. And then I got that dreadful thing on Uber where you don't get hooked up with a drone. So I cancelled that, and I thought I'll take my chances on the tube. 8 o'clock comes around, there's no action, the crowd is growing. About 8:05, a fella in there in the high-vis vest comes to the gate. Everyone surges forward thinking, here we go. Okay. And I'm thinking, look, if I'm on a train by 9, I'm going to be fine. That's the way it works. Because if I get here at 5 to 10, goodness knows what I'll talk about, but at least I'll be here. And as long as the mouth is moving, the man gets paid. So that's the crucial. As long as the mouth is moving, O'Brien gets paid. I think we can all agree that's the major priority for most of us of a weekday morning. And then he says, no, we're not opening. Lots of Piccadilly line stations aren't opening because there is still staff shortages. And you know, the trains are stuck where they shouldn't be and people are here. So you could make your way there or you could make your way there. And I didn't panic because I was still 8:05, you know, but I did worry a little bit about what plan to take next. Now, this is the point where I become a commuter ninja. I love public transport, even on a day like today, which is, of course, going to be the topic that we discuss shortly. But I'm a great believer that I can beat the app. It's not a very healthy, it's a slightly arrogant attitude, but the apps calculate according to and they're very clever. Please don't text me about how apps work. But I kind of travel so much by public transport, and often in quite a leisurely fashion, because when I'm on my way home, I clock off so early compared to other people that I sometimes use public transport as a sort of very cheap tourist type attraction. You know, the open top buses that cost a few quid to go on. You get on the top deck of a bus you don't normally catch. So I don't do it every day, but I'm often to be found enjoying a route that bears very little resemblance to where I should be. So I'm thinking about doing that. And then I remember Mrs. O'Brien's working this morning and she needs to be near a tube station by about 9 o'clock. So I get on the bus home and I ring home and no one picks up. So I begin to think, this could have been a miscalculation. But then finally, so I get a lift from my wife to another tube station where there is a train due in 1 minute. And I get on it and everyone relaxes. But it could have gone horribly wrong. And that bit standing outside the station where the gates are shut and you're thinking, and also I've got the kind of job where I think, and I'm not going to bet the house on this, but I think people would notice if I wasn't here at 10 o'clock in the morning. Just a few people. My mum, for example, would get quite worried. If I wasn't here at 10 o'clock in the morning, Keith would be distraught. He'd be weeping into his Alpine if I wasn't here at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a terrible thought. His little face now, even thinking about it's made him go all quivery. So people would notice if I wasn't here at 10 o'clock in the morning, including my accountant. And it gives you a sort of fit of the vapours, a very mild fit of the vapours. So here's the thing, all right? When does it snap? Because obviously today I felt the stirrings of anger with the people responsible for my inconvenience and perhaps more pertinently my panic. I'm not a sort of 100% binary supporter of industrial action. It normally seems to me to be a little bit more nuanced than footballification would allow. Some of the accusations being levelled at the RMT with regard to so-called Spanish practices seem to be solid, despite Mick Lynch's magnificent media performances. And good grief, he really does do the memory of the late Bob Crow a service, doesn't he, by marching into studios and leaving carnage in his wake. A couple of the Tory MPs that deigned to take him on, if they were bright enough to realise how comprehensively they had been dismantled, they'd never go on television or radio again. But, you know, luckily for them, they're not bright enough to know what day it is in the case of some of them, never mind how completely they've been rinsed by a trade unionist who they are probably conditioned to look down on. So there seemed to be, thanks to everyone like Craig who's pointed out Wes Streeting could do my holiday cover and that would probably be a good thing. I think you'll find the fellas a little bit busy at the moment. So there are some pertinent points on that side, but on the other side, people are facing job losses, whether it is through redundancies or whether it is through being replaced by a robot. And while there might be a grim inevitability to the march of technology, if you work in a supermarket, you probably didn't have much say in whether or not you were going to be replaced by a self-service checkout. I bet you wish you did. I bet you wish you had some say. Do you see what I mean about nuance? So even in the cases of the arguments against the RMT, which seem to be fairly copper-bottomed, imagine it was your job that was being replaced by technology. What would you want your trade union, to whom you pay a subscription every year, to do? Would you want them to just wave it through and put 50p in the collection plate for your leaving present? Or would you want them to resist the removal of your job, the redundancy of your position? Would you want them to resist it? Or would you want them to put 50p in your leaving collection, shake you by the hand and wish you well in the future? That's what you pay your subs for. And again, that can't be binary. Otherwise, we'd still be going to work on horses because the trade union of horse breeders had successfully seen off the threat of the car industry. None of it is binary. But my God, this government and their client media want you to think that it is. You don't even have to check what the front page of the Daily Mail today. Labour isn't working. 12 years of Tory rule, a strike on the railways, and the Daily Mail, who it is rumoured the sort of eminence grise of their editorial floor over the last 30 years, is going to get a seat in the House of Lords just a couple of days after the Mail pulled that story from its website about Boris Johnson trying to get a plum job in the Foreign Office for his then mistress, Carrie Symonds, although, for the record, I'm sure that's a complete coincidence. His peerage will be for much more than just that. I don't even need to check what the front page is. 12 years of Tory rule, railway strike, blame the opposition. And people will. It's hilarious. We discussed it yesterday. We won't discuss it today because, unlike the editors of the Daily Mail, I think you're too clever to fall for that kind of crud. But what will we fall for? What will we fall for? It's not, I don't think, controversial to suggest that almost all of us will have a point where even if you broadly support the idea of a trade union protecting the livelihoods and the working conditions and indeed the wages of its members, I'll say that again in case you've been persuaded that you should be on the other side of the argument. If you're against the idea of a trade union to which you pay a subscription every year protecting you, then you need to give your head a wobble. It doesn't mean they're always right and everything they do to protect you is justified in the broader picture, on the grander stage, but my goodness me, if you're against the idea of workers having rights and representation, then I think you're probably Dominic Raab's dream human. And when I say human, I mean the kind of human that doesn't like human rights. So Dominic Raab's dream human not only is opposed to representation and rights for workers, but also opposed to rights for humans. And that's you. And I don't think you were made like that. I don't think you have to stay like that. I don't think you need to be like that. But I know how much effort is put into making you like that. And my little role every morning when I finally get to work is to try to give you the antidote to being a human who's opposed to human rights and a worker who's opposed to workers' representation and workers' rights. But we've all got a breaking point. 0345 6060973 is the number to call. And I just want to know where you think yours is. So if, like me, you have stared down the barrel of fairly severe disruption, not like violin time or anything like that, I made it. And obviously if I hadn't made it, I wouldn't have been able to do this introduction because I wouldn't have been here to do it. That's metaphysics, that is. How do you reckon it's going to play out? Because Johnson apparently is bedding down for the long haul. He pathetically sees it as some sort of echo of the miners' strike, as a couple of callers suggested yesterday. I don't remember much about the miners' strike, except never seeing my dad because he was covering it for the Daily Telegraph. What is the relationship between inconvenience? I suppose I want to speak to you if you've already felt a sort of mild level of support for the industrial action taken by the RMT, if you've already felt it wobble as you contemplated a locked tube station or got onto a bus that resembled a sauna. 0345 6060973. And just in case you're feeling unwelcome, tell me why you don't support industrial action. Tell me why you don't think workers should have representation and rights in the face of their employers. Why? Because essentially the opposite position to supporting trade unions is thinking that all workers should do whatever their employers tell them to. That's not, I don't think, an exaggeration, but I'd love you to challenge it if you think you can. But why are you against the idea of workers having the ability to resist the imposition of their employer's will? Unless, of course, you are a huge employer who hates people, in which case I completely understand your position. But if you don't think workers should have a right to fight back against what employers want to do to them, I'd love to know why, genuinely. And I may even try not to have an argument with you because I'm more interested in understanding you than sussing you or making you go viral. I promise. 0345 6060973. And then for everybody else, the broader question of, this looks like it's going to go on for ages. If Johnson's government won't back down, because, as we discussed yesterday, they're loving this. They absolutely love it. They've got their client journalists talking about Keir Starmer or pretending suddenly to care about people who didn't get furloughed. It's magnificent for them to get this division going when we should be talking about all the other catastrophes that they're responsible for. Instead, we're talking about one catastrophe that they're responsible for because there's a fair chance of people being persuaded that it's actually not their fault at all, which is the shaggification of British politics, as opposed to the footballification of British politics. Combine footballification with shaggification, and what do you get? Boris Johnson. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I can't wait to talk to you this morning, not least because for a significant amount of time I was worried that I might not get to. 21 minutes after 10, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We haven't mentioned Brexit yet, so briefly, the RMT was in favour of Brexit. The RMT encouraged its members to vote for Brexit. So again, another example from your humble presenter of how not to be footballified. You don't have to be binary. You can disagree with other people about something and agree with them about another. Although I would point out that 3 years later, the then General Secretary, Mick Cash, was writing to colleagues, writing to union members saying, let there be no mistake, any attempt to create antagonism in your workplace by employers, passengers or colleagues based on nationality will be fought head-on by our union. And that was in a letter under the title The Effects of Brexit on RMT Members. So possibly they had a little bit of room to reconsider. What is going to happen here with you personally, and what's your attitude to the idea that workers deserve at least the right to representation against what employers want to do to them? 22 minutes after 10. Adam's at Heathrow. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time caller here. Listened to you for years.
Thank you.
I find it difficult. I work in logistics myself, and a company which under a lot of pressure at times. Our drivers were delivering goods and whatnot throughout struggling times, and at no stage did they turn around and say, well, we're going on strike because we're not paid enough, or we haven't, the fuel's costing our businesses too much, etc. And I find it as an employer as well, that if an employee came to me and said, I really need a pay rise, times are tough, and I said, well, look, I can't quite manage whatever percent they're calling for, 9%, 11%, whatever. I can't quite manage it. I can manage
7, but they'd almost certainly expect less. And remind us what inflation's going to be?
Well, it's going to be, what is it now, 10.1, is it, or 9.1? It's going to be 11.
So it's a pay. So a 7% pay rise would actually be a pay cut. I know you understand that as a logistics man, but I think it's important to get it out there, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But what I find very difficult, and I've always would always side on that, is I just don't feel it right. If you go to someone who asks for X amount of a pay rise, they say, we can't manage it, we can offer you Y.
It's also mostly about redundancies as well.
Okay.
So if your worker came to you and said, I really like to keep my job, and you just said tough, that would be the world you prefer.
Is there redundancy? I mean, I think the world is changing in terms of how people book tickets online, for example. Are those redundancies mainly in terms of ticket locations?
Not mainly. That's one of the lines that Boris Johnson has put out. But you'll know what it's like now if you get to a tube station in the rush hour during the tourist season. There's people wandering around like headless chickens with no idea where to go or what to do. You saw it a little bit yesterday with the strike.
Terminal 5 at Heathrow is exactly.
But we're not necessarily. Yes, well, precisely. We're not necessarily talking about the specifics of this case this morning. We're talking about the fundamental right of workers to have representation against having the will of their employer imposed upon them. And listen, I know that sounds a bit harsh, but you have rung me to say I think workers should have to do whatever their employers tell them.
Not quite, no.
So how do they resist?
If at the end of the day, if you're asking for X amount of an increase due to the various reasons...
No, but we've already established it's not just that, haven't we?
Okay. But the point is, if you turn around and say, I can't manage that, in which case I ain't coming to work for 3 days, I'm just going to ruin my own company, effectively, not just the country. I find that unreasonable.
But the question isn't about that. The question is, if it helps you, then just focus on the notion of redundancy. If they're getting rid of 5% or 10% of your colleagues and you decide that you want to help them keep their job, what should you be allowed to do in your preferred universe?
We've managed not to make any redundancies throughout the whole thing.
So have a biscuit, but that's not what I'm asking about, is it?
No, but that's okay. So the point would be that there should be some representation. I think.
By whom?
I can kind of agree on that.
By whom?
I'm not a fan of unions, I'll be honest with you.
Okay, well, you can call it something else if you want. I mean, that's how Brexit's going to end up. We're going to end up pretending we're not in it while we are.
That's absolutely right. I agree.
I mean, it's exactly the same with trade union. You don't really like unions, but you're in favour of workers having representation and the powers of collective bargaining, which is what a trade union exists to do.
Collective bargaining, no.
Okay, so what do you mean by representation? I don't want to badger you. So one worker should have the right to say, please don't sack me, and you should have the right to say, oh, sorry, mate, don't let the door smack you on the backside on your way out.
Depends on the individual and their performance and the quality of work they bring to the company.
It doesn't, does it? Yeah, but that's not representation. So who's representing that worker then?
If you have 100 workers, let's say...
No, hang on. I need to pin down the words. I know it's tiresome.
Go on, then.
What do you mean when you say representation? If you simply mean an assessment by the employer on the productivity of an individual, who's representing that individual in that process?
Well, it would be yourself, wouldn't it? At the end of the day, you represent yourself when you go to work, and the quality that you deliver to the employer.
Yeah.
And if you go around, if you're a top performer at the company, you say, well, I should be paid X amount, and round up a load of people who aren't perhaps that great, they're all going to jump in.
And if the boss says,
I want 10%,
and if the employer says we're abolishing weekends, who represents the worker then?
If the employer abolishes weekends,
we're not having a 2-day weekend anymore. You all have to come in 6 days a week, and I don't like you, so you're coming in 7. Do we just do individual representation?
They're not doing that. Who would do that?
No, we're talking about principles, Adam, because I hate to break it to you, but until the trade union movement existed, 2-day weekends were unheard of. What about 8-hour working days? What if you decide that you've got to work 11 or 14? And actually, I don't like you. I don't like you. No, I don't like you. You're working 16. But you've got the right of individual. You've got the right of individual representation. So the fellow working 16 hours, you can't bring anyone else with him, and nobody else should be able to take industrial action to support him. But he can come and see you and say, "Adam, I don't think it's fair that I'm working 16 hours a day and everyone else is working 8, and you should have the right to say tough. Don't let the door hit you on the backside on your way out."
But there will be some people that want to work 16 hours. That would be my only caveat.
That's fine. Well, we won't stop them. Retirement ages?
Well, me, I'm probably going past 70.
Yeah, good for you. But that fella over there, you're going to make him work until he's 90, otherwise he won't get a state pension. Because the unions don't just negotiate with employers, do they? They negotiate with governments as well. Maternity leave?
Maternity leave. Yeah,
Health and safety in the workplace. How many employers do you think look around thinking, gosh, how can we spend more money on looking after our workforce as opposed to waiting for trade union-led legislation to be brought in that prevents them from being electrocuted or hurt at work? Paid holidays? How do you feel about paid holidays? How do you feel about paid holidays?
How do I feel about them?
Yeah.
You should have them.
Yeah, there you go. Who's going to get that for the bloke who's only allowed to represent himself?
Well, you would negotiate it yourself. I mean, that's
one person can have a paid holiday, but the other person can't. You don't think they should all? It should become one come all. You should have collective bargaining to ensure that a workforce gets paid holidays.
No, I don't. I personally myself, if at the end of the day, everything that I achieve, I negotiate myself, and that's a lot with other people in the workplace.
Equality laws? Because, I mean, how can you have equality laws if we're doing it one person at a time?
Well, because
also you're a man, so you're never going to be sacked because you got pregnant, are you? Or you got married, or I mean, you might get sacked because you got ill. That's just unlucky, right? Because you're not going to be able to represent yourself individually if you're too sick to come to the office. So who's going to do it for you?
Well, that's why you have an employment contract.
You don't have an employment contract unless the trade union has won you one.
No,
because you just said you've only got individual representation. You get sick, you can't represent yourself. Who's going to look after your interests? Who's going to make sure you don't get fired for being poorly?
My employer.
Pardon?
My employer.
But he wants to fire you for being poorly.
Well,
besides, if you don't like it, there's someone else who'll do the job.
Perhaps if I was ill it was too often and I didn't perform at work, then he would want to get rid of me, I would fully understand that.
Of course you would. Of course you would.
I would, yeah.
Right,
if you know what the agreement is.
30 years on the clock for a company, off sick for 3 weeks, you're out.
No, I don't. No,
well, who's going to make sure that's not? Who's going to make sure that doesn't happen?
You have a contract in place.
Who's going to make sure that lots of people don't have contracts, as you know? Largely because the trade unions no longer have the power that they used to have. Do you know where you'd be happy?
Yeah, go on.
1852.
That's rubbish.
All right, then, 1854. It's 10:30. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. I tell you something else I thought this morning, not for the first time, but there are some things that shouldn't be privatised, that should be funded by taxpayers. I think transport infrastructure, or at least public transport, might fit into that category in the way that education and health do. Because one thing you really recognise when you're caught in the middle of the consequences of industrial action is how fragile our civilization is. What happens if the trains stop running? Well, a lot, as it turns out. Not as much as would have happened back in the day, but you can't just get in the car because the roads are gridlocked. So what happens to an economy if the trains stop running? And it doesn't mean we should be paying railway workers £1 million a year or anything like that, but it does mean that perhaps we all need to be a little bit more appreciative of which jobs are intrinsic to our civilization, to our society, and which jobs are not. For example, me. Who's more important, the person who got you to work today or the person blathering away in your ears when you got there? It's a slightly nuanced question in the great scheme of things, but it's not that difficult, is it? And yet, who gets paid more? The person cleaning the toilets that you're going to use later, or the person keeping you company while you use them via the medium of headphones? Ugh. I'm not going to think about that again. That's gross. So I just putting out nuance, not simple answers. And of course, other countries manage to have rail travel that costs much, much less than this. A lot of you pointing out that Adam was sort of accidentally suggesting that a company with, say, 35,000 employees should be negotiating individually and independently with each one of them, in which cases I'm sure he would understand the queue would probably reach from here to Leicester. 10:36 is the time. Industrial action. Why are people, if you like, inherently opposed to it, rather than the detail of this action as opposed to that one? Teachers are next. I told you there would be. Don't support teachers, whatever you do. All they do is look after your children when they're in school, and in some ways keep them alive, never mind educated. Otherwise, what would you do? What would you do with kids if it wasn't for teachers? Just sort of lock them in a padded cell in the hope that they didn't harm each other or themselves? Down with teachers. Flipping teachers. Flipping looking after our children. For God's sake, who do they think they are? Asking for a pay rise that'll still be less than inflation. It's ridiculous. Teacher. I tell you who I don't like. The people who look after our children. And don't get me started on doctors. Bloody doctors. Grafting, grasping, greedy little gits they are, those doctors, training for years in order to look after us, keep us alive, help our mums and dads live for a little bit longer, spend a bit more time with the grandchildren. Don't get me started on doctors. Good God, you think teachers are bad? You should meet a bloody doctor. And you know what's coming next, don't you? Flipping firefighters. Marching into buildings. Oh, look at me. I'm so brave in my big yellow helmet. Firefighters. You should try being a radio presenter, mate, if you want to know what hard work looks like. If you want to know what public service really is, you should try shooting your mouth off behind a microphone for 3 hours every day. That's proper graft. That's proper tough. Firefighters. Honestly, if you think teachers are bad, you should meet a blooming railway worker. If you think railway workers are bad, you should meet a doctor. If you think doctors are bad, you should meet a firefighter. God, dear me. And don't get me started on the police. Jeez, the police. Running into the troubles and the problems that we're running away from, trying to keep a lid upon growing discontent and unhappiness, and getting a kicking because they once did a little boo. One of them danced at the Notting Hill Carnival, or 4 of them decided that after a history of institutional racism, it might be quite a good idea if they started reaching out to people from ethnic minorities in the hope of being able to do a better job of policing the communities that are hardest hit by poverty-related crime. Honestly, don't get me started on the police. I'll tell you what, if we could get rid right now of doctors, nurses, railway workers, teachers, firefighters and the police, then we'd be taking back control. Then this country would be a place worth living in. That would be the good old days. You think we had firefighters when Nelson's Armada sailed against Francis Drake in the Battle of the Bulge? No, we didn't. Absolutely not. We didn't have firefighters, did we? On the beaches of Brazil? Nothing like that at all. We didn't have. I tell you what, if we'd had teachers interfering during the Black Hole of Calcutta, they never would have got the lights on. It's outrageous. So get rid of the teachers next, please. 10:38 is the time. Charles is in Northampton. Charles, industrial action. What would you like to say?
Morning, James. That was a bit of a rant there, wasn't it?
I prefer to think of it as a tribute to Stuart Lee without being anywhere near as funny. That's how I'd prefer to think of it.
Indeed. No, I'm calling just to say I'm surprised this hasn't happened about 10 years ago, when the Tories were banging on about austerity.
Again, a crucial point to make there, because I understand your broader point, but it means that the railway workers only take industrial action when they feel they have no choice. It's not. I mean, someone rings in and says they're always on strike. I don't want to give away any trade secrets, but I'll ask them to count the days when they're not on strike and then compare them to the days when they are on strike, and then we'll do a little calculation and we'll wonder how anyone could have ended up thinking that they're always on strike.
Indeed, and like I said, I'm surprised that whether it be the rail workers, the nurses, the doctors, the court workers, probations, anyone who's a government worker in today and 10 years ago have seen a decline in their wages, in real-time wages anyway, seen a decline in their living standards.
But so have I, and I can't go on strike. Says I don't want to use Adam as a catch-all term for anti-worker sentiment, but there are people listening who'll go, well, I haven't got a pension. I haven't had any part. I'm absolutely struggling. Why should they be able to defend themselves when I can't?
Well, that's the beauty of being involved in the membership of the union, isn't it?
Yeah.
But like I said, it's. I mean, I'm not a government worker. I work in the private sector, and I do okay. But my parents grew up. One was a nurse, one was a train driver, and many moons ago. And I think to myself, I look at these people now, whether they're on minimum wage or whether they're on a wage that means that they work full time, but they still can't make ends meet. There's something fundamentally wrong, and I'm still sitting here today thinking, why is it taking so long? I personally believe they should be.
They can't strike. It's really hard to strike. It's really hard to strike, and nobody ever really wants to do it. And I think part of your confusion, perhaps, is caused by the corruption that leads other people down a different path to think that they're somehow opposed to industrial action. Is that it's not easy and it's not done lightly. That's the point, isn't it? Well,
maybe, but I suppose again the rhetoric is that. We can't afford it. Labour left us with no money, yada, yada, yada. And there was also the rhetoric of the magic money tree. And I think people believe that. And they kept on believing it. And so no action was taken. Then, of course, the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, billions and billions and billions of pounds went to, let's say, donors and friends of certain particular political parties.
I was reading Private Eye this week. And it is amazing how that gets overlooked. And the rhetoric of he got all the big calls right completely ignores the observable reality of what he did and what happened. But the cronyism and the contracts handed out to people that were turning up with a sort of box full of used tissues and claiming that it was state-of-the-art PPE is absolutely staggering. And will anyone get into trouble for it?
Well, this is it, and I think it's now, whether they, through the ballots or people have just woken up to the absolute BS that's been going on for the last 12 years.
They're not waking up to it. This is look at what's been done now. It's all Labour's fault, apparently. The consequence of 12 years of dreadful leadership, the consequence in part of Brexit, not so much this problem, but lots of other problems. I stress again, the RMT ridiculously advised its members to support Brexit, so it's not in any way the case that I'm going to agree with them on everything that they do. But I don't think it does. I don't think people do wake up and smell the BS. But, you have to keep trying, Charles. You have to keep trying. Kirsty is in Gurnock in West Scotland. No, Gurrock in West... Sorry. Gurrock. I'm going to go on a course. I'm going to go on a course to pronounce Scottish and Welsh. This place is better. Go on.
No, I think I've spoken to you before. I'm actually.
Well, that's great. That's memorable. Crikey, there's probably women out there who think they might have gone on a date with me in 1985, but they can't quite. What do you mean you think you've spoken to me before?
No, I have spoken to you before, but the point I'm trying to make is I've just finished night shift. I'm a nurse. I'm near native intensive care nurse.
All right, thank you.
I'm a bit croaky.
Yes.
I'm a bit croaky. And I'm getting... I get frustrated. That guy that was on just a few minutes ago that was talking about individually actually trying to work something out. That's because he's probably a good enough guy and thinks...
Of course he is.
Life isn't like that.
No.
Life is just not like that.
Are you suggesting that every nurse in the country couldn't go and have a negotiation on an individual and independent basis with their employer?
He couldn't.
Oh, well, I'm sure Adam will take that on board.
I mean, really, but the fact is, even with us having a union, I mean, the nurses' union is pathetic. I mean, I'm a neonatal intensive care nurse and I've just left really sick babies. And I mean, I wouldn't like to go on strike. But I think we should have done what the Irish did, because when they took our pensions, and literally, I'm 56 now, so the wool's been pulled out from under what happened to me was I was going to being able to retire at 60. I now can't. I now I've got to work till I'm 67 in the neonatal intensive care unit, which is not going to be fun. But that's what the Tories did. That's what the Tories did to me. And I'm not all saying that just because people went in strikes that they're right. But
no, of course not.
The point I'm trying to say is that, and I just feel that this country, that's why I'm an independent supporter, is the fact is that we're getting further away from the people. I feel like we're going back to the Victorian times. I think Britain is a banana republic at the moment. I feel that there's these elites. I mean, look at that guy Green that lost those pensions for £1. He sold the company. What was it? Be it British Home Stores?
Be careful, because I don't want to get sued.
No, but I'm just saying this.
But there are people doing things that you and I find baffling and deeply wrong, who never seem to face any consequences at all. I mean, I think we can confine ourselves to the political spectrum without, or the PPE scandal that was mentioned before. It's crazy.
But why are people? What I don't understand, and I don't know if you agree with me with this.
Well, let's find out.
What I don't understand is why. You're saying you can't understand why is the working class, or my husband is actually saying, what do you mean by working class? But, why are the working people, most people that are not very rich, that have to work, if they didn't, for instance, have a job for 3 or 4 months, they'd probably lose their mortgage or something, like most people. Yeah. People like that, right? Yeah. Why are they going against these unions, when these unions are standing up? But there's other people there, like Boris Johnson and his ilk, that have got rid of billions. Why are people so angry with the little man in the street that might be trying to get an 11% wage increase?
7.
Or 7 or whatever it is. I mean, I don't want to get into numbers here. No. But the point I'm trying to say is, why is it that people and old people that are pensioners who were working class, I'm talking about people that have worked all their life, how come they can just ignore these extreme... it's like obscene.
Well, why do you think it is?
Well, that's why I feel Scotland is getting further and further away.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, don't rub it in. I'm stuck here. But why do you think it is? Why do you think workers who tend not to ring this programme, which is why I don't want Adam to feel too bruised or mistreated when he did have the guts to put his head above the parapet. All of these people with, Billy Bunch of Numbers with his bulldog avatar, and all the people who describe themselves as classical liberals or underemployed barristers or whatever it is that they do. All of these people who are absolutely adamant that trade unions are the scourge of the earth. Why do you think that workers have been persuaded to be against workers' rights?
Because I feel that there's been everybody. It's this. The guy actually mentioned it about the individual to individual. It came with Thatcher. This individualism. Everybody's worried about their own.
I just need to explain to people that there may have been a slight hiccup in your delivery of your diatribe there, Kirsty, because you used a flipping naughty word.
Oh, did I?
If you told me that a lovely nurse who's just finished a night shift with poor sick children in intensive care was going to come on and start effing and jeffing, you didn't F. You jeffed. You didn't F. No, don't worry. We don't need to go back. I'm not going to tell you. Am I? That's an Ofcom all day long. Don't worry. I just didn't want. I didn't want to cut you off. I just wanted to point out you can't use that word on the radio.
Oh, all right. I didn't even know what word. Sorry, I'm half asleep.
I know you are. I know you. Are you not driving? Are you or anything like that? Are you home now?
No, I'm already home.
Well, that's the main thing. All right. Well, I share.
I'm sorry, but
I'm just glad we spotted it. I'm going to move on, just in case you go further and drop the C-bomb next. It's 10:48. It is 10:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm going to tell you something. You've probably worked it out already, but when they ask you, are you in favour of the RMT strike on the railways, and you quite understandably might reply no, what they're going to do is take that as a mandate to get rid of strikes or to make striking considerably harder. It's already harder than it has ever been in our lifetimes, or certainly in my lifetime. You we'll next see an attempt to get rid of it. In the same way that they're trying to get rid of your right to protest or dilute your right to protest. I think, that's something else that is currently being held up in the House of Lords. Today, it's been announced they're going to try and get rid of some of your human rights, which is absolutely fine to object to if you're not a human. They've got rid of your freedom of movement. That again, something that you applauded, perhaps, because you didn't really realise fully that it was going to apply to you. You are losing your... And then you know how mad everything's become when Priti Patel starts boasting about it. We have abolished freedom of movement. That's a win. Well, if I ever write another book, and if my publisher's listening, it's still unlikely. If I ever write another book, I think I might do a list of moments, because then I could get you to do all the work. Moments of madness. Madness, moments. And just all the things that, if you told your 21-year-old self that you were going to be living in a country where that happened, and everyone was okay with it, you wouldn't have believed them. So a Home Secretary boasting about abolishing freedom of movement for her own country. It's fantastic. We now have a lot less freedom of movement than we had when I came into power. Pardon? A Foreign Secretary trying to get his mistress, who he was... what's the word I want? I don't want to turn into that last lady and start using words on the radio that would involve Keith flexing his dump button. A Foreign Secretary, I don't know, what's the word? Well, committing adultery. There you go. I sound like a Catholic priest. A woman is committing adultery. We're trying to get her a £100,000 a year job in the Foreign Office, where he is in charge. And worse than that, when the story begins to percolate, people in Downing Street ringing up the Times in order to get the story lifted. And the same with the Mail, where the editor-in-chief is reported to be about to get a peerage. I hope it follows him around. I hope he is, if he does get a seat in the House of Lords, I hope he has to sit between Claire Fox and Claire Fox and David Frost. That's almost like purgatory or the other place. But I hope it follows him around if he does get a peerage. The idea that it emerged days after Downing Street put pressure on a couple of media outlets to pull a story that painted the Prime Minister in an unflattering light. It'd be quite nice, really, if that were to be the sort of postscript to every mention of Paul Dacre's peerage. Oh, the bloke. Oh, yeah, okay, him, right. Yeah, it may not have had anything to do with him, but since when did anyone at the Daily Mail care about the unvarnished truth? 10:55 is the time. Back to industrial action. Craig's in Clitheroe. Craig, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on this morning.
You're very welcome.
A couple of things, really. First of all, both myself and my wife are public sector workers. I work for the civil service. I'm a member of the PCS union. My wife's a teacher. We've been absolutely clobbered since 2010. Our wages in real term have dropped by probably about 20%. Both our respective unions are very. Striking is the very last thing that we want to do, because a lot of people don't realise that, thanks to changes in the law by Thatcher back in the 70s and the 80s, when you go on strike now, you don't get paid. Just talking about Thatcher, I think this is one of the problems that we have with the way that people view the unions, the demonisation that she started back in the 70s and the 80s when she came into power on the back of the winter of discontent, rubbish piled high in the streets.
How does it play with younger voters, though? Because you and I hope I'm not doing you a disservice, but I can vaguely remember that. I remember doing my homework with a candle, but obviously I thought that was cool when I was a kid. I didn't realise the broader ramifications of it. And it was another period when I never saw my dad, because he was an industrial correspondent, so he was all over the shop. But where the younger voters, they've just been gaslit, really. They've just never known it any different, have they? So
No, they haven't. And again, I think it's successive Tory governments that have demonised the unions, made them out to be, militant left-wing communist troublemakers.
Yes, this is one of my moments of madness, isn't it? We've got a population of workers who have been successfully persuaded to be opposed to workers' rights. It's actually it's a hop, skip, and a jump to making people abolish their own freedom and movement. Workers being opposed to workers' rights, and now humans being told to reject human rights. It's breathtaking.
Well, I was a workplace rep for my union for many years, and then I actually changed job roles, so I wasn't able to carry on doing it. But we used to see a lot of younger people coming into the civil service, quite a lot of them with degrees, people with really good qualifications, and we really had to work incredibly hard to even get them to listen to the benefits of being in the union.
Wow.
And how the union could help them. And the number of times that I used to sit down with members and we used to have meetings with managers and I used to represent them. It was frightening the number of times that I had to do that, James. And a lot of the younger people coming into the public sector really didn't understand collective barging, being in a strong
mission accomplished, isn't it? Mission accomplished. What do you use? What would you say if it was me? So we've only got a minute. It's me. I'm the young one. And also, I've been to university. I'm not one of these horny-handed sons of the soil who's going to down tools at the first sign of trouble. Why do I need a union, Craig?
Well, because it's all about collective bargaining and it's about protecting yourself from, unscrupulous practices by management.
And then you're back to I'm all right, Jack, aren't you? Well, I'm not currently a victim of unscrupulous practices by management, so why on earth would I want to spend 80 quid a year paying subs to an organisation that will protect me in the unlikely event of someone as brilliant as me being unscrupulously exploited by management? And we're back to our friend at Heathrow who started the hour.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I can guarantee that no matter how bulletproof you think you are, it can happen to you in the workplace. It's as simple as that.
Of course it can.
But I support the RMT. I think what they're doing is right. I've had to work from home this week because I normally take a couple of days in the office, and I'm one of those people that Jacob Rees-Mogg hates.
No, he loves you today. No, stop that! You put that down. Today it's brilliant today working from home because it's meant that all those railway workers who can't work from home are not going to have the success that they want with their industrial action because people like you can work from home. So they love you today, mate. If this radio station has given the impression that anybody is opposed to the idea of people like you working from home, they would now like to apologise and withdraw that position completely, because working from home is superb because it actually means that the RMT's industrial action isn't going to hit as hard as it might otherwise have done. I'm glad you gave me an opportunity to clear that up. And if I have ever given the impression, or anybody has ever given the impression, that we were opposed to working from home because people like railway workers don't have the option to work from home, you might deploy the phrase laptop class in this context or something like that, then obviously I need you to forget that. There is a hypnotist available because now working from home is brilliant and railway workers are not a sector of the community that we care about. Here's the thing, 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Which story do you think the government would rather we talked about now? I mean that genuinely, actually. I don't want to talk about the one they don't want us to talk about. I'm fairly confident that they would like us to talk about the state pension being set to rise by 10% next year, even as ministers are demanding that public sector workers don't get any pay rises that keep track of inflation. There's another story as well, which I did allude to briefly yesterday. A bidder pays £120,000 for awkward dinner with the last three Tory leaders. This is a Tory fundraising dinner at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which, on the night of the railway industrial action, and of course in the midst of a cost of living crisis, one of the people attending who was successful in her bids for some of the lots being auctioned was Lyubov Chernukin, whose husband Vladimir was previously Russia's deputy finance minister. God, that pays well because she's given more than £2 million to the Conservative Party over the years. She's a British citizen, of course, which means she's perfectly entitled to do so, and she has condemned the invasion of Ukraine by the man who used to be her husband's boss as truly horrifying. She declined to comment on whether she won the bid, That's the £120,000 for dinner with Theresa May, David Cameron and Boris Johnson. I spoke to my wife last night about how much we'd be able to raise in order to avoid being forced to have dinner with David Cameron, Boris Johnson and Theresa May. The answer was probably not enough. She once paid 160 grand for the chance to play tennis with David Cameron and Boris Johnson, so she's clearly a glutton for punishment, and £135,000 to have dinner with Theresa May and 6 of her cabinet ministers. Other high-profile donors present included the property developer Nick Candy, the hedge fund billionaire Michael Heinz, the founder of Annabelle's Private Members Club, Robin Burley, and John Moynihan, the venture capitalist. Also present, Sir Linton Crosby, the Australian elections guru, who was sitting next to Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary. If you want to go next year, you need 20 grand for a table, a premium table. You can get a standard one for 12.5 grand. And I think if you pay 20 grand, you might get to sit next to Priti Patel or Sajid Javid or Elizabeth Truss. And that, I think, is a really important story, oddly. And as a former gossip columnist, obviously I probably lean towards thinking that parties are more important than anybody else does. But that is their people. That is where they are most comfortable. That is who they choose to look after. You do not pay hundreds of thousands. You don't pay £20,000 for a dinner table in a room full of politicians unless there's something in it for you, or unless you think there might be something in it for you. It wasn't that long ago that a former pornographer turned property developer lobbied a government minister at one of these events in the hope of seeing changes to rulings handed down with regard to one of his property developments. And I think if I remember correctly, his lobbying was successful. There's an African safari trip that went for £65,000 and a shooting weekend for £37,000. I mean, who here hasn't got £37,000 to spend on a shooting trip? And these are the people that they care about. These are their people. Well, I say that because Boris Johnson actually left early to go and work in a food bank. Yeah, my nose just grew 6 inches. Boris Johnson left early because he didn't want to miss Rupert Murdoch's summer party at the Serpentine Gallery in Hyde Park. But there are people in the Red Wall who think that he is somehow on their side. And increasingly, Keir Starmer's failure to land any sense that he is on their side is frustrating an awful lot of people inside and outside the Labour movement. But there it is, the wife of a former deputy finance minister under Vladimir Putin, who is now worth millions upon millions of pounds, bidding tens of thousands of pounds and quite possibly being the successful 120 grand bidder for dinner with the last 3 Tory leaders. And today, people who attended that dinner will be popping up on television to tell you why railway workers don't deserve a pay rise that is only a little bit behind inflation. It's great, isn't it? I don't know if there's much that we can say about this, except that I understand that many people listening, even now, will think that this is the natural order and that you know your place and that is their place. That these are better people than you. They are made of superior raw materials. The rich man is in his castle and you are at his gate, and God made them high and you lowly and ordered our estate. And the trade union movement, this is relevant actually, because of course the trade union movement exists to close these gaps. It exists to ensure that people who have 120 grand spare to pay for dinner with Theresa May, David Cameron and Boris Johnson don't get to tell their employees to suck up pay cuts, or don't get to compromise health and safety legislation, or don't get to force them to work more hours than they want to, or come in on weekends. That's it. I mean, it's not a battle with a winner or a loser. It's a constant tension between the tireless pursuit of profit and the tireless pursuit of protection for workers who provide profit. Because the people who get the profit don't care often. Some do. There's some great bosses out there. But goodness me, you wonder, don't you? I mean, you think the Marie Antoinette story, which is probably apocryphal, when you're growing up as a kid, you think, good God, how did that happen? People can't eat bread, and then some French aristocrat comes out and says, well, let them eat brioche then, let them eat cake. And then you read about this. People furious with the railway workers, but somehow it's patriotic. for the Russian wife of Vladimir Putin's former finance minister to drop tens of thousands of pounds on meaningless baubles, and possibly, it's not been confirmed who paid for it, dinner with the last 3 Conservative prime ministers. She'll probably feel like Macbeth when she turns up at that. 10 minutes after 11 is the time. But the story I probably am going to draw your attention to instead, and by the way, don't forget what I said at the end of that. Boris Johnson left early because he had to go to Rupert Murdoch's summer party, and it was, of course, Rupert Murdoch's Times that pulled the story about Boris Johnson trying to get a 100 grand a year job for his mistress, who he was committing adultery with while his wife was being treated for cancer, in the Foreign Office where he worked. The Guardian reports today that there is evidence to support that story, but I haven't seen it yet, so I will still say reportedly tried to get his mistress a job in the Foreign Office on 100 grand a year. And Rupert Murdoch owns the Times, so I don't know who they called to get that story pulled. They also got it pulled from the Mail, where the editor-in-chief is rumoured to be about to receive a seat in the House of Lords. And I'll say it again, I'm sure the timing is a complete coincidence. And I also need to thank everybody involved in this for giving me a crash course in what the Streisand effect actually is, because I spent many, many years completely misunderstanding what the phrase means. It's when you try and shut down a story in the hope that people won't notice it, and you actually end up drawing a lot more attention to the story than you had hoped or intended. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why aren't they giving pensioners a 10% pay rise? Simple question. I'm in favour of it, by the way, but if they can't afford pay rises for public sector workers of 7%, how can they afford 10% pay rises for pensioners? And what are the numbers like? How many are there? The problem I've got here with this story, and I could be wrong, and if you can talk me out of this, then I'll give you the money myself, all right? I think we're supposed to start. I think people like me are supposed to start getting angry with pensioners, aren't we? Because take the logic of the industrial action to the 10% rise in pensions, and surely everybody who is opposed to railway workers getting a 7% pay rise on the grounds that, well, you haven't had that kind of pay rise for years, is supposed to get cross with the pensioners getting a 10% pay rise. And pensioners are just ex-railway workers. And, of course, many, many other sectors as well. You don't suddenly become a paragon of virtue when you become a pensioner. I'm a huge supporter of the state pension, but I'm also very, very cognizant of the fact that pensioners vote Conservative a lot more readily than any other generation in the country, any other cohort in the country. So when I say to you, why have they given pensioners a 10% pay rise when they can't afford to pay public sectors in line with inflation? There is one rather obvious answer. But I'm really interested in the divide and rule element of this story, because it won't work with me. And I don't think it will work with the people who have been successfully persuaded to hate on railway workers and firefighters and teachers and junior doctors and whoever's up next. But it might work on others. Why are pensioners getting a 10? Why are Tory voting? That's how you'd phrase it, isn't it, if you were trying to be unkind? Why are Tory voting pensioners getting a 10% pay rise when I've not had one for years? So, just the why of it. Any answer you've got, actually. I just want to know why you think Downing Street has managed to provide an inflation matching rise for pensioners while urging wage restraint in the public sector. All right, hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Why or how or both has Downing Street trumpeted an inflation matching rise for state pensioners while urging wage restraint in the public sector? Just answer that question from any angle you want. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And if you're really struggling, if you're going to work every day and really struggling, I want you to resist the urge to get angry or envious, because the pensioners deserve it. The point, of course, of my politics is that so do you. 17 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to the welcome news that pensioners will see their state pension rise by 10% next year, but the curious comparison with public sector workers who ministers are insistent can't have a pay rise that is even close to inflation. That is the same inflation that Boris Johnson said you didn't need to worry about, but which is now rocketing. Claire's in Fleet. Claire, what's going on?
I'm trying to work out. First-time caller, by the way, long-time listener. Very, very excited. I'm turning my nerves into excitement.
It's going to be an anticlimax, Claire. Can I apologise in advance for this not living up to your excited expectations?
No, not really. Well, no, of course it is. No, I think it's their tactic to give the young an enemy. Mm. I think with everything else with teachers and firefighters, most younger voters are perhaps more left-leaning and more supportive of those groups that they have tried to divide people on.
Maybe.
But pensioners are like an easy target because it's like, well, they've got their percentage rise, why haven't we? And then that makes them angry and then they can turn against the young people.
Will it work? I mean, I don't have any young people of the relevant age in my life at the moment, but generally speaking, I don't know that they're that easily led by the nose. This, of course, is why a certain brand of conservative hates teachers and schools so much, because the education system is not currently churning out people who fall for whatever crud is served up by the right-wing media and the Brexit government.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't. They're trying. They're trying the culture wars with everything else that young people are very in tune with. And I don't know if they're just sort of clutching at straws at the moment. They're clearly looking for something, aren't they? But it's
yeah. I mean,
what I had was like young people.
But if they had to, if I made you choose about who's going to get a few more quid, is it going to be public sector workers or is it going to be pensioners? You might choose pensioners, just to be the devil's advocate for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I think I'm so sort of aware of the amount of dividing tactics that are going on that it feels like it's another chop somewhere. It's a them against us scenario, but who's the us? And my immediate thought was an age gap, especially given Tory, pensioners are traditionally Tory voters.
There's a percentage. I mean, there'd be. I don't want my switchboard clogged up with Labour supporting or Lib Dem or SNP or Plaid Cymru or Green supporting pensioners. But it is fertile ground for. Also, they're more likely to vote as well. So it's a win-win.
They're pandering to their base, aren't they?
I think so. Yes.
The general thought, but it was just a thought I had, and I thought, I'm going to ring in. Is it?
Well, I like it.
I don't know.
No,
I can't think of anything else.
We may be overthinking it, and it may be that we have actually just lost the ability to believe for a nanosecond that they might have, whether deliberately or accidentally, done something for non-nefarious reasons, non-cynical reasons, non-disgusting reasons. It's not designed to cause division. It is just, a tough choice. But of course, I don't know how you can simultaneously say we can't afford to pay people who are working in line with inflation, but we can afford to pay people who aren't. Scott's in Wigan. Scott, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello, Scott.
Sorry, the same as Claire, first-time call.
Welcome.
I've just had to pull over because it's...
Good. That's what I'm here for, to ruin your day, to disrupt your day and make you pull over when you've got better things to do. That's what I'm here for. Go on, then.
I totally agree with Claire. It's such a divisive topic, and the government, not just the actual Boris Johnson's lot, but the opposition as well. There's such tit-for-tat, divisive, diverting the attention away from the real meaty topics, and there's a complete lack of any policy from any of them. And just thinking about what Claire was saying then about, is it trying to get that, get the young people to hate the old people? I don't even think it's that. I think it could be even a clever ploy that, fast forward to October and the cost of living crisis, the energy cap's risen again, and pensioners are having to choose between heating and eating. But Boris Johnson gave them a 10% pension increase 6 months ago. We were the government that gave it to them. Actually, that 10% that's something that they should have been having, say, 2 or 3% for the last 5-6 years. I mean, I've got an elderly grandfather who he gets a state pension. He's 86 years old, so I'm not quite sure on the makeup of his state pension.
Sure.
But he gets taxed on it.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a private pension. He has no private pension coming in. So the government are giving him a pension but taxing him on it. So does that mean he's now going to pay more tax because he's getting a 10% hike in his pension?
'Twas ever thus, though. I mean, that's not new. I suppose I don't know what the rationale behind it is, but the tension between giving them more or taking less tax is probably bureaucratic and logistical more than ideological or political. It's next year it comes in, so not October. But I'm just splitting hairs for the point of
But it's been announced now, so it's stored up that it's been announced now, and in October, we know this government announced a pension increase of 10%.
So how many pensioners are struggling, you see, as well? Because, property ownership and so-called boomers, someone's texting me to say 4 in 10 pensioners are millionaires, according to their assets. But I find that impossible. I find that impossible to believe, unless you can cite a source. I'm going to dismiss that one out of hand. But, again, it goes to people who, in large part, won't need it. And yet, here it is.
I beg to differ. I mean,
fair enough.
You can live within a bubble where, yes, there's some wealthy, the baby boomers that are sat on maybe a few 100,000.
Oh no, I know some people need it. I speak to them. They ring me to tell me they can't afford to turn the heating on. No, sorry, I'm not suggesting that for a minute.
I just think it's another example that the government of today is so divisive. They thrive off division. They all divide and conquer, and will divert your attention across to we're giving pensioners 10% and divert us away from the issue around the
I'd like to argue with you. I'd like to use your very polite phrase, Scott. I'd like to beg to differ with you on this, but the timing makes it tricky, I think. The fact that it's announced